One of the main discussion points within Pokemon Legends EA is about how all of the Pokemon moving into the city impact life for the humans who call it home. And while we see this conflict arise throughout the story, it never quite reaches a resolution. However, its effects are visible as you progress through the game, since more and more wild zones begin to appear, permanently displacing the people who could be encountered there. And since I mainly focused on the game's story and wild zones on my first playthrough, I was curious to see if there's any interesting lore or world building that I may have missed. So I started a second save file and went to explore all of the would-be wild zones just to see who was there and what they had to say. The beginning of Legends EA has a lot of invisible walls to prevent you from exploring, but the game does set you free as soon as you unlock the side quests from Emma, and at that point there's already 6 wild zones present on the map. So the first human zone I can go explore is the Magenta Plaza. There you can run into a little boy who likes to use conventionally weak Pokemon, a guy making references to the battle test from X and Y, some ladies discussing the matchup of Terra Pokemon versus Mega Evolved Pokemon, then there's a stall owner giving you some battle tips, and an old guy who lost a Pokemon battle, and yet another stall owner. Next to them, there's 2 office ladies discussing the sculptures made by Brassius, and how they'd love to see them in the Lumiose Museum. There's a guy standing right on the Wild Zone's boundary who's trying to convince himself to talk more, and a tourist sharing facts about the water in Lumiose, although it doesn't look as clear on the Switch 1 version. We also have a rich lady happy to have Pokemon, and a businessman who doesn't believe in the Fists of Justice. Another lady is talking about a French game I've never heard of, and an NPC looking Javi is trash talking Pokemon who are too dumb to use potions. There's 2 schoolgirls planning to enter the ZA Royale together, and a random collector yapping about the world. Also a random lady yapping about how delulu she is. And this battle girl is asking the real question: do Pokemon even want to coexist with humans? We've also got a crazy art lady discussing the meaning of art, and 2 joggers training up for the wild zones. The irony. Nearby we can see some Piers fans singing some of his songs, but I don't really know what they sound like because man's got no voice when I last saw him. In the middle of the zone, there's some kids talking about the obelisk and a family discussing Pokemon, including how this kid's first memory is of a Meowstic levitating them. Sounds kinda traumatizing if you ask me. So overall, we lost 31 people when Wild Zone 7 was formed. Next we have Human Zone 8, formerly known as Jaune Plaza. And it's also extremely lively here. There's a big market space and a lot of store owners, although it sounds like they weren't doing too well financially before they got booted, while others were just vibing. This one guy knows we'll talk fondly of the game a few years later when we finally leave Lumiose, and this lady might have witnessed another back theft by her favorite Pancham. Nearby we see a stall owner informing his customer that the daily special is sold out, but the customer is too busy foreshadowing the future of the zone. So many Pokemon will chase you here. And then we've got a guy who makes coffee that Pokemon love but people hate, and the 2 ladies that are thinking about what their Pokemon might be thinking about the wild zones. Another old couple nearby is talking about how people will always gather in the plazas, which is bad news for them because every plaza in this game becomes a wild zone later. There's also 2 kids talking about a 3rd kid who brags about all the Pokemon he has captured, and 2 ladies who've been coming to Jaune Plaza to enjoy the sun since they were little girls. Again, I got bad news for them. There's another group of kids giving research suggestions to one of their friends, and more stall owners hoping to sleep standing, brag about their Pokemon, and a mention of roller skates. Sounds to me like the developers knew about them and just chose not to include them in the game. But we're not done exploring just yet. There's a tourist taking photos to post online, a guy thinking about his boxed Pokemon, and a lady who wants some of her Pokemon's vitality. What is she, a reverse Litwick? This service worker is exhausted from standing all day, and this courier is curious about how many other courier colleagues he has. An old lady is too tired to be angry, and a berry salesgirl has nothing to say about it. The next row of stall owners has a guy talking about origami, and a collector who probably has a Goldengo but can't use it since it's not in this game's Pokedex. Nearby, there's a lady who wants to match her outfit with her Pokemon, just like all the other girlies posting online. We also see a guy with his Excadrill giving some good life lessons, a bread salesman who wants to get transferred, don't worry you will soon, and his neighbor who never wants to leave, although she definitely left later because all of the stalls are either gone or completely rearranged once the Pokemon show up. So after becoming Wild Zone 8, Jaune Plaza lost 35 people. However, it did gain 2 crazies who still run their stalls and sell berries despite the horde of angry Drillbur there. But still, they seem like different characters than the ones who were there before, so we lost 35. Thankfully, things aren't as bad with Human Zone 9, since there weren't much people there to begin with. Here's a guy who likes to give commentary on battles, a policeman who only wants to win, a tourist who thinks he's in Vegas, and a battle girl who promotes overleveling. A nearby student girl talks about the battle courts and a backpacker about his backpack. This man's is asking a random question, and the two kids nearby are talking about climbing ladders and how it's not scary thanks to the Rotom phone. This one guy is worried about being ambushed in an alley, which might happen if he sticks around because this is where the Sableye spawn. And this girl gives us lore about the Rust Syndicate's bamboo garden. Then we have an unsolicited music taste and a guy who's either a genius or an absolute coward. And near the Mawile spawn we can see a kid complaining that the Battle Royale is rated E10, a construction worker discussing ladders and elevators, and two ladies discussing the price of a Furisode. I don't know how to pronounce this word. And if you're wondering how much this thing actually costs, it's around 4 million Poké Dollars. I don't know why she's using nuggets for currency here. This area also has a lot of rooftops, but there's not that many people up there. The only ones you run into is this couple where the guy gave his Pokemon a weird nickname and then traded it over. But once traded, you can't change the nickname of a Pokemon, so the poor girl is probably stuck with Pika Rick or something like that. But it doesn't matter because once the Pokemon show up, we lose all 19 of the people found in this area. Up next we have Human Zone 10, where you can find an alpha in the back alley? That'd be disastrous. Funny enough, this guy isn't in the zoned area and still says the same thing once the Sharpedo's there. On the way in, you run into a lady with her ice cream, two backpackers who ran out of money and are gonna try to battle royale for some quick cash, two sisters where the younger one is coaching the older, an invincible guy and his watchdog, and an old lady with some good life advice. There's also a kid complaining to his Pokemon that he woke up cranky, but at least he's not as cranky as the Pokemon that'll spawn here later. While heading up near the Sharpedo spawn, we see a girl who wants to Mega Evolve her Garchomp and her dad saying that they need a Mega Ring from Quasartico Inc. Then there's this office lady who seems like she's part of Dynamo but feels a bit overwhelmed, and a trainer with his Simipour who wants to reach rank A to take over his dad's company. There's also some kids talking about the Pokemon flying above Lumiose, except I don't see any Pokemon up there, and another group of kids talking about the colors of Floette, including the black version that we've seen at Hotel Z. The last guy hanging out near the ladder just gives info about how moves like Heavy Slam scale with weight. The rooftops were once again surprisingly empty here. There's two ladies enjoying the clean air but dreading the flight of stairs, and another pair where the guy is getting burned more than my Pokemon when I go battle Kabu. So overall, we end up losing 20 people here once the sharks show up. Moving on to Zone 11, which is a nice park on both sides of the river. We've got a lady who likes to stare at the water, two kids saying Pokemon are cute and cool, and a guy who thinks the grass is greener on the other side of the park. So let's go over there and see. Well, it looks like there's a kid avoiding anxiety, I wish it was that easy, an elderly gentleman talking about battle etiquette, a couple where the guy isn't ready to beat her in a Pokemon battle, right? And there's also a lady with a Roserade who did not have a good winning streak during the last night of battles. Man, there's less people in this park than if you lived in America. Only 9 people got displaced, and it became mostly a dog park now. Also, unlike the previous zones, there weren't really any battle tips, world lore, or useful information here. It just made it a bit harder to go take a walk. Although there is an NPC outside of the zone who does mention that she's taking a stroll around the hotel. Not sure which of these buildings is a hotel, but I assume it lost some business after the park became a wild zone. Moving on from the least impactful wild zone to the most impactful one, because Human Zone 12 got turned into a winter wonderland once the Pokemon showed up. But before that, we've got a backpacker reminiscing about how we had to use the PC to access boxes in the older games. Next to her, there's a couple observing a family Pokemon battle to decide where to go for lunch, although the guy cares more about the battle itself. One side is running Scizor and Heracross, hoping to go out for food with lots of calories, while the other side has no food preference, but it does look like they have the type advantage. On the other side of the court, we have a business lady who thinks her Pokemon are cute, a guy wondering where he put his skates, making it the second time this missing mechanic gets mentioned. Next to him is a kid that just doesn't like losing, also he's dressed ready for when the Ice-type Pokemon show up. Further down the park, a kid is asking her mom an uncomfortable question, and a lady wondering why her party maxes out at 6. But at least she's not this guy, who's more than a little late. Thankfully, the old guy next to him is asking questions early. This lady on the bench confirms that the music we hear throughout the city is actually played on speakers and everyone can hear it, including the NPCs. But sadly, I don't know what the name of this tune is either. Near here, there's a lady trainer and her coach, a family of 3 planning to take on the Wild Zones and reach rank A so they can go on a trip around the world. Maybe they should start a travel vlog instead. Near them, there's 4 kids talking about how they want to look for a legendary Pokemon. There's also a dad and his son talking about how the dad will grant the kid a wish if he can win in battle, and the jogger that gives us a useful tip about movement. Dashing is faster. There's also a guy saying some random stuff, and last but not least, an old guy is worried about the Lumiose press closing down, although it sounds like they're working a second job at a nearby cafe. So either Cafe Class or Nouveau Cafe Truck 2, which might imply that the Lumiose press was ran by Team Flare. Either way, once the ice Pokemon show up, we lose all 31 people who could be found hanging out in Aymlis Park. And yes, the name of this park is some sort of variation of idling or being aimless in all the other languages, which I thought was pretty silly. I suppose you're just chilling here. The next area that becomes a wild zone is a small section of the Northern Boulevard, which has a little wooded area. There we can see a little girl complaining how she needs to find another route to school. There's also a police officer whose favorite Pokemon literally has the word crook in its name, and a guy who used to use the Pidgeymail but doesn't have a Pidgey for some reason. A nearby tourist spotted an alpha Pokemon on the rooftops, probably referring to the Spritzy that spawns nearby. There's also a backpacker who loves the food in Lumiose, and a broke girl who can't afford a fancy hotel, but will take a selfie out front and gloat to her friends. Near them is a guy realizing just how broken Dig is in this game, and a guy next to him who just wants some space, but could be nicer about it. This lady reminds me that knowing how to dodge is vital, meanwhile the girl near her wants to watch her Pokemon play. Me too, little one. They just look at me and then fall asleep. Further down the street, there's a girl who is ready to move as long as her new apartment has an elevator, and finally there's a tourist couple where the guy rightfully complains how he feels a little ripped off due to the small portion sizes. The NPC size in this section is rather small, but we do lose all 13 of them when this becomes Wild Zone 13, which is a nice coincidence if you ask me. The next human zone is an even smaller one since it's technically the electrical substation, and the only NPCs you can find there are people who work there. There's a guy who checks the equipment, a guy who chases off wild Pokemon, and another guy concerned with how much electricity those Pokemon are stealing. Then there's a small meeting of 3 guys all basically saying safety first, and their boss reminding them of the same rules. So 7 workers in total who either don't work there anymore or have to battle a bunch of Pokemon to keep the city's power going. Human Zone 15 starts near Cafe Action and is another small park area. 2 kids are talking about how they want to raise the same Pokemon. One guy is wondering how you get rid of Pokemon droppings. Then there's this super introvert like me since he's definitely feeling lonely in the big city, and near him is a battle girl reminding us to dodge. The lady at Cafe Ultimo does not despawn, but she does always charge you 100k for a drink, so I doubt that business actually got impacted by the Wild Zone. Not that many people can afford this. Near the benches we can see a veteran trainer giving some advice to a student and a collector who really loves collecting. There is also a rooftop part of this wild zone where a bunch of Larvitars spawn and can be accessed via a Holovator. However, the quest was not available early game, and I don't have a way of checking at the moment. I can see that there's at least 3 people up there from a nearby rooftop, but since I can't get to the actual location, I don't know what they have to say. So it looks like there's a total of 11 people who got displaced by this wild zone. These zones have been kind of small, however the next one on the list is much bigger since it's another major plaza, Blue Plaza to be specific. On the way in, we see a couple where the guy is once again getting called out for being silly. There's a family of 4 trying to decide what their second Pokemon should be. Near them is a guy talking about apartments' policies of keeping Pokemon. This tourist lady gives us a good reminder to take photos because the city does in fact change, including this very location. Near her is a guy who overslept and is now running late, and in the little wooded area we see a guy who wants to try the Furisod. Again, I have no idea how to pronounce this thing. And a little further down, you see a guy who's happy to have Pokemon. I ended up circling the perimeter of this area, but there weren't any other people that got despawned, so let's head on in. First we have a kid who gets woken up by his Pokemon, making him the second NPC to have trouble sleeping thanks to a Spupa. This office lady had a fateful encounter, whatever that's supposed to mean. And there's this guy, who's asking about bodily fluids and water type moves. You already know he's getting quoted a lot about his questionable statement, but he does disappear, so if you're wondering where he is, he was here, but he ain't here no more, he gone. Near him is a battle girl reminding you to use a variety of moves instead of just spamming the best one, and near her is a kid wondering where all the Skiddo went. Wild Zone 3, little one, that's where they are. There's a guy stuck on a Pokemon he failed to catch, and a girl telling him to move on, or maybe telling players to move on because Pokemon has changed over the years. Near them there's a berry salesman who says nothing but does abandon his stand. The other stand sells Lumio's Galettes, and while this lady was nice to the Pokemon were not nice to her since she's also gone when it becomes a wild zone. Near that stand you can find a family that's being very cautious about running into wild Pokemon, and near them there's two ladies, one of which is considering retiring from Pokemon battles. At the center of the plaza there's two schoolboys thinking of following a wild Pokemon, and a group of 3 kids talking about how one of their Pokemon bites their butt if he loses in battle. Not sure how this isn't as weird as the bodily fluids guy, but I haven't seen it quoted at all. So maybe don't start now, I don't know, it's weird. Or maybe he just never got quoted because this becomes Wild Zone 16 and no one can find the 31 NPCs ever again. Funny enough, Human Zone 17 does have some kids playing hide and seek, 3 in total. While not quite in the zone, this jogger also disappears, but he might be playing tag with his Pokemon. Not sure if I can say the same about this backpacker who's seen alpha Pokemon, but thinks they got big because of the gourmet food. Maybe she went to a restaurant or something trying to become an alpha herself. Back to the actual zones, we've got a waitress working at the stand, an old guy who loves the peace and quiet, and a businessman who also loves to relax here. The biggest lore loss is this Abra guy who gives us a good reference for how long it's been since the events of X and Y. On the way up the stairs, there's a guy saying many Pokemon are nocturnal, a man chilling on a bench, and a tourist wondering if the wild Pokemon in Lumiose will become more civilized. What do you think, Pyroar? Well, there's your answer. This lady keeps her Pokemon in the ball when traveling by car, while the nearby office lady hints towards the taxi cabs and their wild stories. There's a family of 3 wondering if Pokemon get territorial. What do you have to say about this one, Pyroar? There's your answer, gamers. Near one of the exits we can find a backpacker who shares that Lumiose is on everyone's bucket list, and near another exit a guy is wondering if Pokemon even like it here. What do you think, Pyroar? I think they might like it here. And the last guy we have in this area is on the small rooftop, where we can find a construction worker who happens to be scared of heights. So, he probably picked the wrong job. Overall, the Lions ended up chasing out 18 people from this area, but 20 if you added the 2 who were just outside and wandered off elsewhere. Speaking of wandering, let's wander into the back streets of Human Zone 18. There's a little girl standing near the entrance, sounding a little sus about the redevelopment plan. There's a backpacker who's likely a drifter, and a construction worker who's very grateful for his Pokemon. On the main street, you see this guy thinking about taking his girl out for a fancy date. There's also a kid thinking about the origins of Mega Evolutions, and a lady wondering what type of ball to buy at the Ball Emporium. I suggest the Premier Ball because you can finally just buy them outright. Walking in the other direction, you can run into a lady who's quit roller skating, making it reference number 3 to this mechanic. Near her is an old man with good life advice, a hex maniac finding a way to inflate the value of haunted buildings, and a foolish fool who thinks he can fool people into thinking he's an alpha Pokemon if only he was 6 feet tall. Near him is a rich girl who would rather climb the ranks of the SBC, and a family of 3 commenting on how to raise Pokemon. The last 2 guys speak the obvious. The higher the rank, the stronger the trainers, and whoever gives out those bonus cards must have a lot of money, because they really are handing out tons of cash at the end of each night to participating trainers. Up on the rooftops, there aren't any NPCs that hang out within the zone, but there are some near the zone that do go away once this area does become a wild zone. There's these 2 ladies who seem to be talking about completely different subjects, there's these 2 kids rooting for Ivor and Corbeau, and another duo talking about how the wild zones are bringing tourists in, while the other is on about good meeting locations. Once again, it feels like they're not really talking to each other. So if you only count the trainers within the wild zone, Area 18 displaced a total of 16 people, and if you do count the nearby non-wild zoned roof area, then it's gotten rid of 22 people total. And that leaves us with Human Zone 19, which is yet another park full of grape trees. I think these do look like grapes to me. Inside the park we can find a couple where the guy is flexing his childhood Sandstorm team, but I'm pretty sure Sandstorm teams don't exist in this game. There's a guy wanting an app that tells you all the moves a Pokemon can learn, which would be a great quality of life feature maybe in the Pokédex. That way I don't have to Google it. Put it in the game, Game Freak. This weird dude is getting used to the smell of Pokemon, while the backpacker is worried about what'll happen if all the wild Pokemon pulled a Rust Syndicate level raid. Nearby there's a tourist couple, and it sounds like the guy saw one of the Zygarde cells while in Alola. Another couple shows a guy struggling to understand how stats work. There's also an artist who either has a skill issue or is a top tier troll. Near her is an old lady giving once again life advice. Why do all the people just give you life advice? And further down there's 2 ladies, one of which really loves the Pokemon Numel, and she's onto something. They are kinda cute. If you keep following the grapevine, you'll run into a guy buying more ebooks than he's willing to read, a battle girl who suggests people fight against Pokemon directly, and a schoolgirl who just wants to win. I almost missed this family planning to have a competition to see who can catch the biggest Pokemon. And unless I missed anyone else, Wild Zone 19 ends up displacing another 19 NPCs total. I like it when the zone number is the same as the number of NPCs that got nuked. So overall, from the 13 soon-to-be wild zones, Lumio City ended up losing 268 citizens, an average of 20 per wild zone. And while most of them were saying random things, there were a fair share of these NPCs making references to the older games, giving us useful tips, and selling useful items. Thankfully, there are a bunch of duplicate shops throughout the city, so we still have access to those items. Also, in case you're curious, I did check all of these areas during the nighttime since there's sometimes different NPCs depending on the time of day. However, all of the places that turned into wild zones were completely empty during the night. No people, no Pokemon, just a silent street in the middle of town. Overall, this was a fun little experiment that got me to revisit all of the wild zones and check out all of the dialogue I missed during my first run of the game. And if you made it this far in the video, I suppose you were curious too, so let me know in the comments down below if you've learned anything new or interesting. Or perhaps there's something I missed. I'm also curious to hear what you think about this whole wild zone thing. Is it good for the people of Lumios? Is it bad for the people of Lumios? Now that you know what the impact has been on the citizens of Lumios. I think a lot of these wild zones ended up taking over places where people love to hang out or places where people work, so I can definitely see why this is causing problems and why some people are very much upset about it. And just like the game, I don't really have a solution to this, but it is a very interesting concept. Either way, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!